Welcome to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for everyone interested in responsible stewardship of the planet, covering topics related to food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Scott Billy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Billy. Welcome to Sustainability Now. Today, I'll be your host, and I'm really excited to be joined by Jonathan Cloud and Victoria Zelin, the co-founders of Possible Planet. It's a 501c3 whose mission is financing the transition to a regenerative future. They're really focused on how to attract capital and investing in clean energy, resiliency, and restoring the earth. So, hi.
Hi. Thank you for having us.
Oh, my pleasure. Can you start with a little more detail about Possible Planet to fill folks in on what you're up to?
Sure. We actually were founded as the Center for Regenerative Community Solutions in 2013. We got our 501c3 that year as well. And that was in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. And our goal has been to work with communities and try to bring capital into this space, understanding that we need to make this transition to a regenerative economy. And just proved to be difficult for people to, or even us, to get our tongues around Center for Regenerative Community Solutions every time we wanted to talk about ourselves. And so I think it was Victoria's sister came up with this, or maybe Victoria, Possible Planet. And it really speaks to who we are, because I think this is kind of the age of possibility.
Absolutely. I really like the forward thinking and, envisioning that sort of next normal that people are starting to talk about now, rather than returning to the new norm or the old normal or whatever. We're starting to get to the tail end of this COVID thing.
Right.
Yeah. Also, Jonathan happens to be someone who has kind of regularly anticipated where the market direction is going in the field of sustainability ever since we met, when he was building solar, passive solar greenhouses and additions to houses and eventually buildings. So started out as a sociologist saying, we need to invest in this area. And the Canadian government where he was working said, well, there's nobody to invest in. There's no companies doing this. So he went out and he started a solar construction company, never having wielded a hammer in his life. And a couple of years later, he's on the cover of Canadian Building Magazine with one of his just awesome projects, huge sunroom with mass and, passive solar. At those times, solar was ineffective. We would drive around and there'd be melting roofs and things, tarred up, trying to get solar panels to work, back in the early 80s. So, and a continual way that he's out looking at the possibilities. And I'm very much interested in making sure that people are really delving into themselves. What are they passionate about and how can they contribute to a possible planet? So my background is more organization development, training, coaching, and transformation, organizational breakthroughs.
That's great. Well, now that we're talking about buildings, maybe we should talk a little bit about, the program specifically that got us talking to each other was the PACE program, Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing. And it sounded like such a great concept to me that I definitely wanted to pursue it and learn more about it. And that led to this conversation. Right. And before we get into what PACE is and how it works, the whole idea in my layman's understanding of it is that it's a way to use your property as collateral and put a lien on it to upgrade energy efficiency projects, adding solar, insulation, new windows, those kinds of things. And one of the things I really wanted to start with was, why focus on the built infrastructure as a main source of your efforts?
Well, it's partly because that's the way in which we have most altered the environment that we live in, the biosphere. We've built an enormous amount over the past several hundred years. and our buildings are not efficient. They're not designed well to face the sun. And they are a source of about 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we worry about in terms of climate change. And commercial buildings, by the way, are about 70% of that 40%. So that's where our focus is. And, at one level, you could say, well, it's going to be hard to transform the entire built environment that we have to net zero operating. But the ultimate goal is that we have to get in balance with the carbon cycle. And this is probably going to mean not only net zero buildings, but buildings that capture more carbon than they emit. Now, admittedly, that's a kind of a futuristic concept. And what PACE is all about, property assessed clean energy, is about doing what we can do today to conserve energy, to save money, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to make our buildings more resilient and better for humans to operate in. I don't know if people are aware, but the indoor air quality is as big an issue as the outdoor air quality, if not bigger. And we, especially in the period after COVID, there's going to be an emphasis on adequate ventilation and on not losing a whole bunch of heat when you're doing that. Right. So, but in principle, the legislation that covers PACE, and this is probably an important aspect that we'll get into, generally doesn't specify the list of things that you can do or that you can get financing for. It simply says that you have to go above code or increase the efficiency or renewable content of your energy from where you are today. And that's enough to justify investing in it, because every little bit that we do reduces some additional carbon.
Absolutely. You kind of read my mind. I was going to ask what kinds of projects would qualify. So it's mostly, I originally thought in the HVAC space as the no-brainer. You move from an older boiler or air handler into something that's more efficient, adding solar, things like that. But could it also include increasing your insulation value, changing out your lighting and things like that?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
go ahead.
Building controls, lighting, windows, insulation, anything to do with the building envelope, motors. So industrial is a big target, and motors that use a lot of electricity, there are ways to reduce the electricity going into these motors. Solar, obviously, or geothermal. And many states, there are two kinds. There's just states like New York, which are focused on energy savings. And all of the efforts that you've done, they call them measures, all of these individual measures need to reduce your energy use. That's the main thing. And then there's usually in New York State, this is true, an SIR, which is a savings to investment rate ratio. And you need to save more than what you've invested financially. And typically what that means in PACE is not over the long term, but it's like period per period, so that the energy savings that you achieve by putting in these energy efficiency or renewable energy measures, period by period, those savings are actually paying for the costs of installing and doing the engineering and audits that it took to get the building to where it is right now. So that's one of the beauties of property assessed clean energy, is that the owners can be not out of pocket a dime. All of this is 100% financed by the private sector. And the law makes sure that the municipalities and the banks are all looking at the loan so that it's a really good loan. It makes sense for the building because the value of the property itself needs to be able to carry these improvements. The whole concept of PACE is around the municipality or the county, depending on who collects taxes, has the ability for public purposes to put an assessment on the property that would be in the public's interest, so that it could be the investment in the property, which will be there forever, can be attached to the property as a loan, paid back over the long term. Like, people are very familiar with a mortgage. A mortgage is 30 years, and it's secured by the property. So what PACE is you're attaching things that will stay with the property. You can't take them with you when you leave. The next owner will have the use of them, and you attach the loan to the property, and you can amortize it, which is, to spread out the payments over the average useful life of those measures. And then period for period, the savings that you get pay off whatever you owe when you divide that whole loan into up to 30 years of payments. So it's a beautiful concept, allowing regular people, regular building owners without cash, without credit to put into this, to be able to afford to upgrade their buildings, which is a public benefit. Having a building stock that attracts buyers and tenants and visitors is really important. When you're in a city with abandoned buildings because they're too expensive to operate, it's a drag on the economy. It's a drag on every business there. And it's a drag on taxpayers because they don't have those ratables to pay. They don't have those businesses that will pay their taxes, that will support all the services needed. So we'll go into this in more detail, but PACE is a beautiful system that's a public win, for climate, and carbon reduction, for property owners, saves them money, it doesn't cost them a dime out of pocket, creates jobs, and allows the commercial space to flourish.
That's great. And I know that you led right into one of my next points I was going to ask about, is the way that this addresses that the barriers to investing in these kinds of upgrades are usually, number one is having that capital up front and being able to realistically make it back over the course of a loan. If you have a 10-year loan or something like that, and you put $1 million upgrade onto your facility, you can't just hand that over to your tenants in rent, because then your facility is outpriced all the other ones around, and they're going to move somewhere else or not come in the first place. So this is a really beautiful solution where it spreads that cost out, keeps it attached to the property, and allows for people to get in without having that big upfront investment, to make the upgrades now and enjoy them as you're paying for them, as opposed to having to pay for them upfront or finance it over a short term that makes it difficult to pay back.
Right. And Victoria talked about it as a loan, and that is one way to look at it, but it's also the case that it's not actually a loan to the property owner. It's kind of like a loan to the property, because it doesn't require, personal guarantees. It doesn't show up necessarily on the books of the company or the property owner as a liability, fully over the course of the term. It's only that year's payments that are due each year. It cannot be accelerated. So they built in a number of features into the PACE design, the PACE model, where it protects the owner, it protects the mortgage lender, the mortgage holder on the property, if there is one. And it does allow for the property owner to pass on some of the costs, and as well as the savings, a proportional portion of the savings, to the tenants if they have this kind of triple net lease, which is common in the commercial real estate industry. Right. So it's customized to the particular property and to the particular improvements that are being made, and that's how it works. And
I imagine it makes it much more attractive to the people providing the funding, because they've got a pretty well guaranteed return. They're not going to have anybody default on them because of the fact that it is tied to the property tax, and the lien is sort of the ultimate enforcer there.
Right. And even if there is a default, which really it's been incredibly rare in the last 12 years.
One in 12 years.
Of commercial properties. But the financing, the responsibility for paying that back doesn't go away in a default. It stays with the property. And so when another person buys it, or it's, taken over by the bank, things like this, those payments continue to be made back to the original investors in the PACE program.
That's great. So even in the case where somebody does, unfortunately go out of business or whatever the scenario is, those improvements have been made and the benefits are going to be realized by the next owner. So it becomes a more attractive property and I imagine more easy to resell.
Right.
Someone's got to do the upgrades. Buildings are built when they're built and they get obsolete accordingly.
Can you give some examples of the types of buildings or projects that make the best candidates for this?
Yes. And one of the things that if anyone is, what we would love to do is anybody who's interested in real estate, and a lot of people are interested in real estate, that they contact us to be able to do this in their city, because we can make this accessible to anyone with a head on their shoulders, willingness to network, to find the resources. And we know the people who want to lend. There's tons of money. There's totally abundance of private capital that wants to lend to this kind of purpose. And we need lots of people to activate building owners to do this, do these upgrades. So this can be quite simple.
Commercial PACE, people may think of office buildings, but it includes not just commercial and industrial, but also multifamily buildings and agricultural properties and nonprofit or institutional properties that are not government owned, but schools, universities, hospitals, churches. But the potential is just enormous when you think about it. The Biden administration wants to see 4 million buildings, commercial buildings, upgraded in the next 4 years. That's going to cost over $500 billion altogether. And PACE needs to kind of step up and provide its share of that money, because, there are other sources, of course, including government, but government can't finance it all. And so this is an opportunity for the investors as well as for the property owners. And that's what we're trying to scale up and make more generally available and more widely understood.
Right. And I think that you just touched on something that I had wanted to bring up, was the idea that there is federal subsidies and there are state subsidies. And I think that a lot of people, are under the misconception that that can handle it. And ultimately, that's an incentive to try to jumpstart an industry, but it's not a long-term solution for an actually sustainable project or a sustainable plan for how we can actually make these things happen.
Yeah,
right. And it certainly doesn't cover 100% of the costs of doing these things either.
Yeah, I was going to give you an example of New Jersey has a program called Direct Install, which is really great. It's for small businesses, and it pays up to 70% of the cost of upgrades to small and mid-sized buildings. But it's often turned down because they don't want to put the 30% in. Either they don't have it or they've got other uses for their capital. And that's totally a shame. I mean, 70% is a lot. And then when you only have to put 30% in, it might pay back in 2 or 3 or 4 years, which sounds like, for something that's going to last 30 or 40 years, that's a good deal. But businesses that either don't have the money or don't choose to put it in. And that's why PACE is so valuable, because PACE can finance the 30%.
Absolutely. Now, how does it stack up against things like mezzanine capital and other sources that people would rely on if they were trying to cover that 30%? Any other alternative?
It's a lot less costly than mezzanine financing. For example, if you're talking about new construction, part of the capital stack, which is really the last piece that normally comes to play. And PACE can substitute for that, and even substitute for some of the equity investment in the property, which is also quite expensive if you think about the return that has to be provided to the equity. So PACE has historically been around 6% interest rate.
It's come down to about 5% now, between 5 and 6.
But people need to understand that when you take into account the cost of capital to a business, the and that includes the cost of equity. And the short terms that are available from bankers, you typically can't get a business loan for longer than 7 or 8 years. And this allows you to really spread the payments out in such a way that it makes sense from day one to do this.
So what is the max that you could spread out a PACE loan or PACE?
Well, it again varies by state because this is based on state law. So in the case of New York, it's 30 years, up to 30 years. It has to be based on the average useful life of the improvements that you're making, so that you don't get kind of out of sync with the financing compared to the benefits that you're getting. And some measures like, replacing your lighting have a 2-year payback.
But you could extend it 10 years because they're
Right.
they're warranted for 10 years.
And solar, for example, has a payback beyond the normal 25 years that people estimate the lifespan of solar panels.
Sure, it makes the property desirable for resale if you're in sync, but not very desirable if you've fallen out of sync and you're still paying for something that's already outlived its lifespan.
And it will never happen because the people who are financing it, the senior lenders that have to approve it, and the municipality are all watching for these kinds of things because they have a vested interest in this building being viable, saleable, rentable, leasable for the
Absolutely.
For the future.
So it's really clear that PACE is not a solution to all of our climate problems, but it is an important part of the many solutions that we need to implement, because if we're going to get to a net zero emission society anytime soon, to a carbon neutral way of operating our economy, there's so much that needs to change and so much that needs investment in order to change. And our buildings are a prime example of that.
Absolutely. We've got an infrastructure that's pushing the boundaries of its useful lifespan, and it's time for the upgrades. And this is a way to get those upgrades happening without laying that capital down up front.
Right, and going in the right direction. We think about it as paying property owners to do the right thing.
Because generally they're making money on this deal.
Yep. And I think it's great for the property owner and the tenants. It solves that landlord-tenant dilemma of the tenants want the upgrades, but the landlords don't necessarily want to dip in their own pocket to make them happen, just to make the tenants happy. But it also really improves the community and the lifestyle of the entire area around the building itself. And I thought maybe we should touch on that a little bit too, and some of the things that you've seen and how that has made that kind of impact too.
Well, we have been talking with a group that is doing what they call place-based investing in Philadelphia. They've picked Philadelphia. They've done a number of projects that involve the community. They are building a multi-family housing project with some community space in the heart of an under-resourced neighborhood where people don't want to invest. So what happens is when you have this project that is working with the community to say, what do you want? We want to put benefits here that you can use because we want to upgrade everyone in the community, not just the people living in our building. And what we want is from people who are already living in the community to come and live in this building. The building will be a lot, I think a good part will be affordable and some market rate. So you're bringing in the new buildings on the retail on the bottom of, often these things are mixed use in urban spaces. So they'll have retail storefronts on the bottom floor. Maybe they'll do some conference things on the mezzanine level, right above the bottom floor. And the community can use them for events. There's a building we know, 744 Broad Street in Newark, that has this gorgeous old building built in probably the 30s. It was originally the tallest building there. And they invite the public to have their public meetings, and it's just a fabulous space. And then above that are either offices or residences, depending on the mixed use. And a lot of buildings are being converted from business use to residential because people want to be in the cities. Boomers want to be, millennials want to be in the city where there's an active nightlife. There's things to do. And So that's what's happening with some of these older buildings when they're converted for the other reasons of the new electrical, the new HVAC, all new windows and stuff like that. They'll make them into residential, which these days is much more, whether it's rental or condo,
So the funding is there to help make the building happen, and then the building improves the quality of life in the area that it happens in. You're either replacing blight or putting up a new infrastructure in a place that needs it. So you're giving those opportunities to work, live, play in that area. So you've got the sort of social benefits, and in addition to the building and the fact that we're talking about clean energy, it's carbon sequestering or improving on the emissions of what was there before. So the benefits start to stack up for the community beyond just the building owner as well. And one of the others that you mentioned when we spoke earlier was the idea that all of these buildings are creating jobs as well, both in the construction and then generally in the life of the building. People can go and work there as well.
By the way, of course, if you build a new building, there's going to be buildings springing up around it to support whatever's in that building. And that's a natural process. And that's what it's designed to do. But when I saw that financing is the key to sustainability, that things that don't exist now, people aren't going to put them in if it costs money. Well, somebody financing them. And as long as they pay for themselves over their lifetime, people are willing to finance these good things. So getting into and just being able to connect with the people that want to do these kinds of financing with very secure monies like assessment-based improvement projects, which is what PACE is. It's assessment-based, based on the special assessment, which the collateral is the land and the buildings. And that's a very creative way. And you don't have to know a lot about finance to do this. You've really got to be able to educate people. And that's what's been missing in the PACE industry. We have $2 billion invested in commercial buildings in the last 12 years through PACE, which is a pittance. I know it sounds like a big number, but it's a pittance. For Biden's plan, the NIESCO, who represents the energy services contractors, says that if we look at Biden's plan, we should be getting $130 billion from PACE financing. And that's in the next 4 years. And we've only done $2 billion in 12 years. So what's the gap? So what we're working on is how to get the community educated so that, grandkids are telling their grandparents, you own a building. Are you doing this? Do you know about it? I can show you where to find it, how to get that. Teenagers can have a business going on, knocking on doors and saying, look, you're going to make money doing this. And it's going to be good for all kinds of other things. You're going to make money on this. Can I show you how? Can I introduce you to the people who can do this for you?
Right. So the sort of process is that you need to be in a state that's already passed a law that allows PACE financing to happen. And then the partnership is either...
There's one other thing. Not only a state law, Scott, but you have to have your municipality or your county, whichever is the one that's collecting taxes. They have to pass whatever they call it, an ordinance, a law, allowing for PACE.
Right. So basically, the group of people that we need to activate and help to advance this whole process need to be in states where PACE is happening, and then find the municipalities that have already signed on to spread the word that this is currently available in any given municipalities within that state, either county or local level, or approach their municipalities about joining and starting the process.
Yes.
Right, because it's really, something that allows for business retention and attraction. So if communities are thinking about this from the point of view of economic development and from the point of view of being a place that businesses want to go to, and of course, if you get a significant amount of business, going in the community and they're paying property taxes, that can keep the property taxes down for the residential part of the community. So having PACE available is one of those things that can make it very attractive for a business to move into your area.
And job development, job creation. So I have a vision, or we have a vision for what a community could do with PACE. That would be a huge economic engine to transform any, kind of broken down city that's got some life that's on, hopefully on the upswing, although you could do it anytime. Can you imagine that if we had the community alerted and everyone advised by someone who they trust? We're using trusted advisors. We've been here in Rochester for a couple of months learning how things work. And what our intention is to get each of the business networks, there's usually a Chamber of Commerce and, the American Society of Engineers and electrical contractors. And, every industry has its own association. And there are many industries that are part of the PACE world. And those are their trusted advisors. The people who belong to those organizations trust that the people on top in those organizations that are doing the industry lobbying and all of that, then they know that they will tell them the truth. PACE is good for you. You don't have to do all the research we did. Just here it is, and here's how you use it. So for every group, women's groups, veterans, local neighborhood associations, if everyone has a trusted advisor that can carry the word, just so you know, if you know anyone who's a property owner, here are the kind of requirements, have them contact me. And people that are listening to this that want to do something and make a big impact on reducing emissions can take this kind of thing on. They can make a commission, 1%, that's called the origination fee, of finding the owner and bringing them to the financier that can help them walk through all of these, ins and outs of PACE on a big project that's meaningful. And if you do enough of them, and if you carve out your own role, but our vision is that we find, an accountant, a lawyer, a commercial real estate broker, a bank, that they kind of get together as trusted advisors in the community. And there could be 7 or 10 pods of these things. And they go out and they let their networks know. All those people have clients with buildings. Get those buildings done and then use referrals to, keep moving out. And then you build a pipeline like sign me up. Hey, we have a contractor that goes into a building that no cost will do an assessment, tell you what it's going to cost, show you in priority order the things that you need, how you can put it together with all the incentives from the state, the feds, any local incentives. It all nets out to, what's the bottom line that you have to be responsible for. Here's the weighted average length that you can amortize it. This will amortize over 17 years, divide all the soft and the hard costs into 17 units. Every year, each one of those is going to come due, but the savings are designed so that every year you have enough savings to pay it off and not taking anything out of your pocket. So getting the business owners and then showing them this is what it's going to save you every month. Would you want to do it? It doesn't cost you anything. And up to here, there's no money spent by the property owner. If they go ahead, they go ahead.
So we'll work with anybody pretty much to get them started in this whole thing, if that's what's needed in that community.
And then the pièce de résistance for me is that you get all these property owners say, put me on the list, have somebody come in, just show me what it will be. And people sign up, the building owners, and then you have a reliable, robust pipeline that you work with your community colleges and your job development people to start training the people that it's going to take to fill the jobs, because they're all local contractors that install these things. They might make them somewhere else, the big units, but most of the work goes into installation and minor, energy efficiency stuff. So why not have the population in the city all working on the buildings in the city, and you reduce the carbon footprint of people getting to work. You increase the standard of living of everybody. You become a nexus for green jobs. So, and then people want to live in the eco villages that we want to build. for their emotional health and for resiliency and, community. So this project came to us as, if we could get the community to see that you can make money going green, you can make money becoming a sustainable, resilient community, a regenerative community, which means, you've got the resources inside to go on forever. And that's what we're intending, is that communities, and the trend is going from global to local again. And you can see this with all the disasters. You've got your friends and neighbors to rely on when you have a fire, when you have a disaster, right? So building that community, which people need for their emotional health, as well as their physical health, and now their economic sustenance. And we have a dozen different enterprises that are fun, that would have put people to work with low to moderate skill, all the way to high skill, in creating these regenerative businesses that every community could use rather than buying from the outside. And
That's great.
Keeping the money local.
Yep.
Including the banks.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Why not borrow from your local bank rather than one of the big multinationals? One of the things that I wanted to touch on was, if people are interested in doing some investigating to find out if they're in an area that already has a state law and a list of municipalities within their state, is there a source for that list that we could put onto our website, and so that people can figure out whether they qualify for this?
Absolutely. The national organization for the entire industry is Pace Nation, which again is another nonprofit. And it operates as a vehicle for education, for letting people know, tracking which states have the legislation and where it stands and the programs that exist and what's available in your area. So that, and again, because we're, immersed in this, we can help people if they come to us and ask us about virtually any jurisdiction in the country. We can let them know what's possible from our perspective there, and where to get the resources and help them get the money.
Awesome. So we'll have contact information and links for all of these resources on our website, sustainabilitynow.global. But if you want to put out your contact info here on the podcast as well, that would be great, so that people know how to get in touch with you for your consultations.
Well, it's easy. I'm Victoria. He's Jonathan, JONATHAN. There's actually
at possibleplanet.org.
Okay.
And of course, we now that we're in Rochester, we're talking with people about Possible Rochester. And we have a website, possiblerochester.com, for the business community here to look at going green. And making money doing it.
And that website is the most recent, probably the easiest to kind of get a simple introduction to PACE without a lot of our other projects. But Possible Planet has the eco villages and also our project on a complementary currency for climate change. We are partnering, as I mentioned, we have it's called the Global Carbon Reward.
Right.
And it's the opposite of what is going on now about taxing carbon use.
It's the complementary side of it, if you like. All the talk about trying to reduce carbon through using the market is all about putting a tax on or a fee on top of the cost of fossil fuels and things like that to discourage their use. Well, that's fine, but we also need to encourage the use of the alternatives. And that's what the Global Carbon Reward is designed to do. And we've been supporting this for more than 5 years now. We're helping them grow to the next level and try to reach some of the central bankers across the what they call the Network for Greening the Financial System, which is a really big deal that central bankers and financial authorities are starting to look at the risk of climate change, biodiversity loss, ecological degradation, and say, wait a minute, this isn't just a risk to other people. This is a risk to the economy and to the financial system, as well as a risk to all life on the planet. And we just can't allow that to happen without doing something about it, because what businesses do is they look at risk over the long term and they take out insurance to deal with that risk. they do the things that are necessary to avoid catastrophic failures that are going to affect them and everyone who works with them and is associated with them in their economy and community.
And the important thing about the global carbon reward is that it pays for every 100 kilos of carbon that is sequestered or avoided. And there'll be a lot of accounting and technical work that goes into that. But what that means is a project that wasn't commercial before, that wasn't commercially viable, it couldn't make enough money to survive, when it knows it's going to get those carbon rewards when it's completed, then they could get they could borrow money for that piece because they know they're going to get the money later, and it's part of the capital stack. And then it pushes over the line and makes that commercially viable. And there's a lot of carbon technologies and projects that need that kind of extra push. And it's a reward. So when you start rewarding for reducing carbon, guess what? You start having businesses that get into that business of reducing carbon.
That's great. Sounds like a whole other interview.
It does. Oh, absolutely.
And there are a couple of other people
We're not,
you should talk
we're not
about.
the keys in that
Talk
one.
with
Right.
about that one, but
Awesome.
yeah, we can set that up as well.
And it's a worldwide collaboration on that one
Great.
with very, PhDs and, things like that.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to hang out with us this afternoon and share your story with our listeners. And we want to make sure that people know that they can reach out to you, and we gave the contact information. And really, our goal is to make these connections. As Sustainability Now, we want to find the people that are making a difference while making a living, spread the word, inspire folks who are listening today to take your own action, whatever that may be. Reach out and get involved in this one if that's what moves you. And really to appreciate the fact that working together, we can shape a world that works.
Absolutely.
Thank you for what Sustainability Now is doing. We wouldn't have met you or all the people in this network. And thank you for your undying commitment to sustainability in the future. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.